Well, we're in basically completely new territory. There's only been one impeachment in New York's history of a governor, but that was over 100 years ago, and the context was completely different than it is today. So I think we're writing a new chapter in the history books here. Well, I think it's probably got some national implications for politics in that Andrew Cuomo, prior to his really multiple scandals at this point, was a very big star in the Democratic Party, widely looked at as a potential Democratic presidential candidate. Clearly had ideas of his own in that regard, and certainly I think some of those have to do with his father and where his career is in relation to his father is something that he talks about a lot. So I think in that sense, all of that is over. I can't imagine that he will have any national political role to play after this. So in that sense, it's certainly historic for him or career ending for him. I think beyond that, I don't see a particular significance. It's an individual story. Impeachments are rare. Impeachments at the state level are very rare. And then impeachments at the state level that get any kind of sustained national attention are even rarer. So I think in that sense, it's kind of a one-off. But certainly, it may create some political crossroads for the state of New York. It'll be interesting to see what happens there. And I think there is probably more significance than at the national scene. Well, there's a lot of moving parts in that question. But certainly, I think one of the implications for the state of New York is if there is an extended impeachment process, or if Governor Cuomo does continue with the strategy that he apparently has been using up to this point, which is to wait and to try to let time be his ally in this, and that people's memories will be constrained, and their energy level for pursuing this may run out. And so that seems to be his strategy. If that type of scenario plays itself out, I think what we're looking at is basically a pause for the state of New York for any significant policy initiatives. And that's because the governor is very powerful in this state, as a key player. And if the governor is solely occupied with this, and frankly, the rest of Albany becomes solely occupied with this, which is, I think, what will happen if we do have a drawn out impeachment process, then there won't be any oxygen left for any other kind of major policy initiatives. Now, having said that, the state's been doing a lot in the last couple of years. Historically high budget, certainly battling COVID, a lot of new programs, a lot of new initiatives. And so maybe taking a pause at this point from a policy perspective wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. If we imagine the scenario under which Kathy Hochul becomes governor, the sitting lieutenant governor becomes governor, whether Andrew Cuomo is removed from office by the state Senate or by this committee of state senators and appellate court judges, or whether he decides to resign, either one of those two, and she becomes governor, that sets up a different dynamic, because I think she will be keen to have some things of her own before her time is done, particularly if she's thinking of running on her own. But also, if we go back and we look at her history, she, I think, arguably is more conservative than Andrew Cuomo is, or at least was. And so she may end up being a different voice coming out of the governor's office on policy deliberations, maybe next year's budget, things that we might imagine that could be real important where her role is. So, but that's a guess, because we have to remember that Andrew Cuomo ran for the first time as governor as a more moderate candidate. I mean, one of his main messages was the state is not economically competitive enough, and we need to make some changes that will make it more competitive. He's moved to the left since he's been in office, and especially so in the last 4 or 5 years. And so Kathy Hochul may feel the pressure to do the same. I don't know, but at least if we look back at her past, it would suggest that she would come in as someone who's more in the center than Andrew Cuomo has been. Well, yes, I think the state attorney general's report was devastating, and I think it has pushed a lot of people over who were kind of waiting to see how it shook out. And so I have not heard any prominent Democratic voice calling for him not to resign and calling for him to continue to resist the pressures to resign. Part of his problem, of course, is that the sexual harassment is just one of the scandals that he's facing. And so you've got some other ones that are pretty significant as well. And you know, those investigations and those hearings are still working their way through. So I think in that sense, you know, it seems like he's standing on an island by himself. And frankly, I have to say, as a longtime political observer, I fully expected that when I woke up this morning, the media would be preparing for a statement of resignation on his part. I thought that's probably what the decision would have been last night after yesterday, and particularly President Biden calling for him to resign. The reporter had to push him a little bit, but that's where he ended up. And so I'm surprised that he's still in office here today. We'll see what the rest of the day brings, but I just can't see a future for him. I just don't see a path. Well, there's a great opportunity for Republicans here. There's no question about that, and they'll be able to run on two things. One, they'll be able to run against these scandals. And second, they will be able to run on the fact that the entire state of New York is still struggling mightily economically. We're about to lose another congressional seat. So that narrative that Republicans have had in recent elections, that the state is losing ground, I think that narrative will be able to get more traction, and we'll have an emphasis to it, or an exclamation point at the end of it, because of this particular situation with Andrew Cuomo. I say all that, but there's a big caveat here, and that is elections are always about choices between alternatives. And so it's who the Republicans end up running. I think that they would be well served to put up a very moderate candidate, one that won't scare away some Democrats, and particularly the ones that are very uneasy with Andrew Cuomo right now or want him to leave, could see in this other candidate a plausible alternative. If they run someone, you know, like a Carl Palladino or someone far on the right, it doesn't really matter who the Democrats run. They will win that office. So the Republicans have to be, I think, tactical and smart about it. It's not clear that that's what they'll do. Yeah. Well, one thing that it does, which is really a tragedy in political terms, is, state politics in New York has not enjoyed a very good reputation among the citizens in the state in recent decades. Citizens don't feel terribly great about their state government. I think they often feel apologetic about it when they travel to other states. And so this is just going to make that all the worse. High profile scandal, governor either resigns, second one to resign in recent memory, or is impeached. So I don't think it helps that way. In terms of policies and what the state is doing and new programs and new legislation, there might be a silver lining here, which I alluded to earlier, which is, again, the state's been doing an awful lot in that regard in the last few years. And I think that having a couple years to take a pause, catch one's breath, rethink some things, put some new people in positions of power, the governor's office in particular, may not be the worst thing for the state. Now, it comes with a terrible cost attached to it, and it's all of the political damage that comes to the state and the state citizens from a scandal of this type. Well, I think with Andrew Cuomo, and other people have made this observation too at earlier points, even prior to the scandals, there are so many Shakespearean aspects to his political career in terms of the relationship with the father, being close to the father, but wanting to exceed the father. And then this death spiral struggle with then President Trump at the time. This adds another Shakespearean aspect to it, which is the irony in the likelihood now that Donald Trump completed his term, but Andrew Cuomo won't complete his. And so somebody has got to write this play. I mean, it's a tragic play, but somebody has got to write this play. And the other aspect is just, and this was similar for Eliot Spitzer's downfall as well. It's the distance that's being traveled here. It's as you said before, the highs of highs and the lows of lows. It is a spectacular fall from a very, very powerful place, being on the A list for presidential candidates, to now really being ineligible. And that is something that, you know, again, is a political tragedy, but is also something that's pretty rare to see, just that level of fall.